Spey, and I'm starting a new series that I'm calling The Backstory. The Backstory basically takes a deep dive into one of my more successful images. In this case, it's going to be the snake roll cast that I shot back in 2014 of my good friend Tim Arsenault. It was shot on the Squamish River in the lower Squamish. And I'm going to talk about a little bit of a story around how that all went down. And then I'll talk to you about the equipment that I used, the settings that I used to capture the image, and that'll be it. And hopefully this will be a new series moving forward that will maybe give you a little bit of insight as to how we go about making these images. So this image is the snake roll cast. What's really cool about this cast, it's actually a left-handed snake roll cast. So Tim is actually a dominant right-handed caster, which makes this image even cooler, just because he's casting with his left hand up, which makes that cast actually quite difficult for most people to accomplish. He's using a mid or a longer head length line, which is also pretty hard to do, and he's making that Spey cast look pretty easy. So the backstory with this image, it was back in 2014, February 8th actually. And so from what I remember, it was myself, Tim, Brian Niska, Craig, and Scoot, and we basically met at the lower parking lot at Fisherman's Park. In the morning it was quite cold. It was definitely chilly that day. We were going to walk all the way up to where the Cheakamus and the Squamish merge, and then fish for early steelhead. So we had walked all the way up the dike, and at that time there was no trespassing signs anywhere, so you could just freely walk all the way up, cross where the Check flows into the Squamish, and then walk all the way up, and there's a really nice run up there, and then we would basically fish our way all the way back down towards where the cars were parked in Fisherman's Park. So we had walked all the way up there. I mean, it takes about an hour to do that, and then you cross, and at that time, you know, there wasn't this whole bear activity situation that's going on up there now. Now you have to be very aware of that. So it's just a really cool time. I mean, I can't believe it's like almost 10 years ago at this point. And so yeah, so that's basically what we did. So we all walked up, and there's a run called Chum Island, which has like a beautiful tail out in it. And it can be, you know, I mean, with the Squamish steelhead, I mean, the run's always been very low. So the reality is that actually catching one in that lower river in February when it's cold and frosty and icing guides and all that is actually really slim to none. Like, I mean, most of us have only caught a couple in our lives down there, but it's just beautiful. It's easy to fish it. It's a great day trip, and you know, at that time it wasn't very busy. Nowadays it's a lot busier, and now there's actually no trespassing signs going up the dike, so you sort of want to follow that, and it's not the easiest to get in there. But in this case, we walked all the way up. I think Tim had basically stopped at the Chum Island spot, and he was fishing down, and it's a pretty long run. So he stopped he started at the top, and he was slowly working his way down. I think Brian and I walked up to the run right above that, which was a pretty good run at that time. I think it's changed now. And you would basically fish a spot right before where the Check, or right below where the Check would dump out. And there was like what we called Elk Island, which was a little island there. And that left bank spot was really quite nice. So he fished down there. I think Craig and Scoot were probably just hanging out fishing there too. And Brian and I walked up. From what I remember, I mean, of course, it was a long time ago, and it was a little bit hard to remember stuff like that. So when we were fishing, and so what happens in that spot is, and that was a beautiful blue sky day, so the sun's really high. So we went out in the morning, and as you basically do, you fish through, you know, the better part of the day, and the days are quite short. So by, you know, around sort of 2:30 or, you know, 1:30, 2:30, 3, the sun gets pretty low in the sky there. And so that sun gets low, and there are a lot of mountains right in that zone, so it actually gets shaded in really early. So even though the sun, it's a beautiful day, it gets quite cold and quite dark quite early there, and of course the sun goes behind the mountains, and then that's it. You'll get another hour or two of daylight, but it just doesn't, it's just cold and you don't get the light. So we were walking, we had fished all that, we were walking back down, and the sun was kind of backlighting. It was just at the edge of the mountain, and it was casting a bit of light on Tim, but the backdrop, as you can see, was in shadow. So basically what we were seeing was Tim's line just sparkling with sunlight, sun hitting him, backlighting the line, backlighting him, with this dark backdrop. It's like one of those lighting situations that's all natural, and you just kind of go like, wow, that is incredible. You just don't see it very often, and that's the kind of lighting that I mean, I'm looking for with all of my fly fishing images and landscape images a lot of times, but it just has to really come together to get sort of like that best lighting scenario. This was it. So immediately, I mean, both me and Brian were like, whoa, that's crazy, that light. So I had been fishing, but I was also shooting, and everybody's fishing, and so I just grabbed my camera and started just, you know, taking tons of photos, going like, this is insane. And of course, you know, within a few minutes after taking, I probably shot like quite a few photos. I mean, at that point, I was shooting a D300S camera with a 70 to 200 2.8. And so that camera, I mean, it's an old camera, but it shot pretty high speed, so you could shoot maybe 9 frames per second. So I was just busting off shots, trying to get a good one in focus, and you know, a good one that would show the cast with it all lit up, and you know, just all the spray coming off of the cast and stuff. And so it's always, you know, you always kind of like, you look at the back of the camera, it is digital, and you're like, oh yeah, I think I'm getting it. But I thought for sure I was getting some good shots. Of course, the sun immediately went down behind the mountain, and that was it. Went to shadow, and that was the end of it. I couldn't believe it. So, I mean, Tim had no idea I was even shooting that photo. And so, I mean, basically that was it. I knew I had a shot. I'm like, this is going to be awesome. So I was looking at it on the back of the camera, and it just looked incredible. I was like, that's it, man. I got a shot. I got a keeper for sure. So that was really cool. And of course, that image, I've got a few of them in that little series, but this particular shot that's on the screen here is one that's been used, I think, in Fly Fish Journal. It's been used as an ad for me, actually. It's been used, I think, in Fly Fusion. It's been used, I mean, it's been used quite a few times. I think it was actually used for Islander Reels as a website kind of back cover at one point. So it was a really successful image, and I think it's just one of those ones that you just have to be out there, and you have to be with the right people. I mean, Tim's an incredible Spey caster. He's always been incredible. I'm just getting better by the day, honestly. And so I was able to, you know, get that shot, and I think a lot of it was him being an incredible caster, him not knowing that I was taking the shot. Of course, the light being just perfect, him being in the light, but the shadow in the backdrop being shadowed, which made all the line just glow with the sunlight and just stand out like crazy. As you can see, it's just got like all the spray coming off of the cast, and you know, shooting at a very high frame rate allowed me to freeze the action and also compress the shot a little bit with the 70 to 200. So I think that's the backstory. It was just a really cool day. I've never been able to duplicate that shot. I've been trying. It just, you have to be there. It's during that time of year, and having the right caster and at the right time at the right spot, and it just happened, and it's just one of those really incredible shots. Yeah, so I just wanted to, that's the backstory. So I think that's what I'm going to be doing from here on out, is just, you know, going through a couple of photos that have been really successful and just talking about them, and then telling you, you know, how I did that. So So moving forward, I have a couple of notes here I'm using. So that was the backstory. And then of course, you know, the tech talk would be, you know, what I actually used to get that shot. So in this case, this shot was handheld. It was, so no tripod was involved. I used the 70 to 200 2.8. So this is the AFS Nikon 70 to 200 2.8. It's just a beautiful lens. It's an old lens now. I've had it for a long time. It's heavy, but it's super sharp, and it's just a beast of a lens, and it compresses the frame. So it really does give you that shallow depth of field when you're shooting at wide open. And in this case, I didn't shoot wide open, but that's the lens that I used. And I don't think I had a polarizer on it. I think I just had a UV filter, because I always have a UV filter just to protect the lens. The camera that I used at that time, this is a pretty old camera. It's my original. It's the Nikon D300S. So it was a little pro camera that had a crop sensor. It was like, so the sensor was a 1.5 crop, which means that it's a small sensor. It's not a full frame, which makes this lens actually, I think 105 to 300. So it's actually longer with this camera than with a full frame camera. But the beauty with this camera was that it was just super robust. It just continues to last. You can basically just beat the crap out of it, and it shoots at a really high frame rate for the size of the camera. So I was able to shoot in continuous mode and just shoot like crazy and get a couple of shots, right? So in this particular shot, I shot it at ISO 250, and I shot it at f9. And it's funny because when I look back at my shots, I sometimes forget like how I actually, you know, the settings that I used, how I actually got the photo. And I would have thought that this was wide open, but it's not. It's f9. But because it was at 200 millimeters, so it was all the way out, which actually makes it 300 on this camera. That's why you have that nice compression and that nice depth of field, even though it's at f9. So usually with a longer lens like this, with those like, you know, bigger or higher millimeters, like being at 300, even though it's at a higher f-stop or closed f-stop, like f9, it actually does create a lot of separation from the backdrop to the angler in that shot, right? So it looks like it's, you know, shot at a wider aperture, but it's actually f9. And then of course the shutter speed is really important. So it was actually at 2/50th of a second, so 250th of a second, so quite a fast shutter speed. I probably would have shot it faster now if I was doing it again. But yeah, it worked. It was good. So yeah, ISO 250, f9 at 250th of a second at 200 millimeters, but on the cropped sensor, 300 millimeters. I usually shoot all my fishing work in an aperture priority mode. So essentially what I do is I pick the aperture. So usually I shoot for more depth of field or less depth of field. And then I let the camera determine the shutter speed, so I don't have to think about it. And I pick the ISO beforehand. So I have like manual control over the ISO, and I have manual control over the aperture, and then I let the camera decide the shutter speed, right? Here, I'm gonna get this back going. That way, you know, I don't have to think about the exposure as quickly because things are happening so fast, right? But I still have a lot of manual control over the exposure that way. So that's the aperture priority mode that I usually use for a lot of my fishing stuff when I'm in a rush, essentially. Yeah. So that was basically the settings, the lens, and the camera that I used. So that's basically it. I think that's pretty much wraps it up. I think I'm going to show the image a few times on the, like, throughout this little video. It is one of my favorite like Spey casting images. I'm really happy with it. I have a few, but that's the one that just sort of like really stands out. The framing is quite good. You can see from a compositional standpoint, I definitely have the image pretty full in the frame, but you can see how Tim is a little bit more off to the left. That does create a little bit of a separation down the middle. So when you want to use an image for like a double page spread in a magazine, you definitely need to have some sort of separation so that you don't have your main focus point right in the middle. It's got to be on one side or the other. The other thing I'll just touch on quickly is the actual focus, right? So with these old cameras, it's a spot focus, so just one single spot for the focus, and I usually put the focus on, in this case, the angler, so Tim, and I just hold that focus down so it's completely locked in focus, and then I just spray. I just take photos, right? And if I move around, I have to refocus, but it is autofocus. When I hold the shutter down halfway, that will focus it. But I put the little red spot essentially on the person or on the place that I want it focused, and then that way it's always focused. So that's about it. I hope that maybe you can learn a little bit from these, you know, kind of like quick tutorials. But yeah, I think that's going to be kind of the backstory of the snake roll Spey cast. Tim Arsenault, owner of Bridge Outfitting, Bridge Fly Fishing, and you know, Spey lines. It's just a really good, it's a really good image, and it's stood the test of time, so to speak. So yeah, there you go. I will see you in the next one.